I was watching Water's World the other day, and he goes out on the street to find out how many people know what Easter is all about. And you would be surprised and saddened to find out that better than half the people out there did not have a clue what holiday was supposed to be happening this weekend. Didn't even know. He just did this on last Friday, and I was watching it. I almost wanted to show it to you, but of course they make a lot of fun of people that answer silly, but I didn't want to do that because I felt like it was more sad than funny. That the vast majority of people have no idea why Christians celebrate Easter. I haven't got a clue. In fact, one person, where did the Easter eggs come from? And someone said, well, I think Jesus laid them or something like that. I don't know. I mean, that's what people think. That's what people think. Now, we do, just real quick, I want to kind of get this kind of business out of the way. We do 2 special offerings a year. One is today on Easter, and the other is around about Christmas. We only do 2, and we don't want to belabor it. So I'm going to call my ushers forward, because what we would like to do right now is collect our regular giving, our regular tithes and offering. What you regularly give, not your special offering. We're going to do that at the end when I'm done preaching this word here. What I want you to do now, this is your regular offering, not the special one. This is what you give normally so that the lights stay on and the mortgage gets paid and my family gets to eat and that sort of thing. That's your regular stuff. The other offering is for our special offering, which I sent you a letter about. How many of you got the letter I sent to you? Asked you to pray about what you would do for that. And we'll talk about that at the end. So I'm going to have the ushers, as I begin, I'm going to have the ushers just pass this. This is your regular offering. Just want to make sure. So what I want to do, if it's okay with you, is I want to start today with a little story. I like to tell this story. It's a little bit humorous, I think. I usually have to give a heads up if I'm going to try to be funny. Because how many of you know that every time I try it, it falls flat, it doesn't work, because I'm not a stand-up comedian? All right? Sometimes people laugh at something that I say, but I never plan it. It just kind of comes out of me. This is an effort. See how we do here. Once upon a time, there were 3 guys that decided to go deer hunting, and one of them was a lawyer, one of them was a doctor, and one of them was a preacher, a pastor. And as they're out deer hunting, they all saw a buck at the same time, big old 12-pointer, and they decide they're all gonna fire, and they shoot at exactly the same time, and the deer goes down. And since all 3 of them fired together, nobody's exactly sure who shot the animal. So they're all rushing up there, and they're having this argument back and forth. And, of course, the pastor's saying, well, I'm a pastor, and I'm an honest man. And the lawyer's saying, well, I'm one of the few honest lawyers in the world. And then the doctor is saying, yes, but I'm a medical guy, and I'm really ethical. And they're going back and forth, and they're having this argument about who shot the buck. And finally, the argument's getting a little bit loud, and a game warden shows up. Now, this game warden knows these 3 idiots. He knows these guys. He's seen them every year. And he's all, everybody calm down. I will figure out who killed the buck. So he looks the animal over and he goes, I got it. The preacher killed the buck. And they said, well, how do you know? And they're going back and forth. And I said, calm down. I know exactly that it is the preacher that shot the buck. And the reason is because the bullet went in one ear and right out the other. That's why. The truth of the matter is that you come on an Easter Sunday. And most of you have heard this story before. Yes, I know Waters went out and he interviewed people, and better than half, most of them under the age of 25, did not know what Easter is about. But if you're here this morning, odds are you do. You've heard this story before. And if you're not careful this morning, what I'm about to say is going to go in one ear and right out the other. Because you're going to think in your heart, I've heard it before. I've heard it before. But I submit to you today that there are probably people in this room that haven't heard it before. Not the way I'm going to teach it. There are people out on the internet that are going to be watching this that haven't heard it before. And there are those of you in this room that have heard it over and over and over again, year in and year out. And I submit to you today that if you open yourself up to the Holy Spirit, He will tell you something new this morning. He will, even if it's just a reminder. But one of the first things that I want you to grasp, and I think that most people in the 21st century, they just really do not get this. There are too many Christians that have sacrificed reason for faith. They've sacrificed knowledge, logic, and fact for faith. They do not know why they believe what they believe, and when they are challenged on it, because in the 21st century, how many of you know people are going to challenge what you believe? There's enough junk floating around on the internet saying that Jesus was a myth, that God, there is no such thing as God, it's just a sky fairy. You believe in the flying spaghetti monster, you might as well. They'll tell you that. It's all over the internet. Just watch YouTube long enough. Just watch one of my channels and take a look at all the comments. I had better than 1,000 comments telling me what a moron I am because I believe in the myth of Jesus Christ. The challenge is out there. The challenge against what we believe, saying it's not factual. And if we as Christians just stand up and say, well, we believe it by faith, then you are no better than somebody who believes in UFOs and they're coming back to get you. That's just as much a subjective belief. But I'm here to tell you that being a Christian is an objective belief. It's a belief based on facts. It's a belief based on the historical fact that Jesus rose from the dead. Now, that's a historical fact. And we could go back and verify it. Our faith is not based on an emotion. It's not based on, well, we like it this way. It's not based on our tradition. It's not based on our family. It's based on historical fact and reason. Christianity is based on history. And what's interesting is that the earliest Christians, if you read the book of Acts, they appealed to those facts. They never appealed to their subjective feelings. They never stood up and say, Jesus has made a wonderful difference in my life. They never did that. They stood up and say, I was an eyewitness. I was there. I saw him crucified. I saw the tomb empty. I saw him alive. I'm an eyewitness and I'm willing to give my life for this testimony. It had nothing to do with God loves me and He has a wonderful plan for my life. It had everything to do with fact and reason. And the truth of the matter is that we today have more evidence to say that Jesus actually lived, actually died, actually rose again from the grave than we do for any other fact of ancient history. There is more evidence to show that Jesus rose from the grave than there is to prove that Julius Caesar ever even existed. And yet you won't find secularists denying that Julius Caesar existed. Why will they deny that Jesus existed? Because Jesus makes an absolute and exclusive claim on your life. Julius Caesar does not. That's why. We have more documents to show that what we have today is the eyewitness accounts that they wrote down than for any other event in all of history. When you look at the resurrection accounts, you have to understand that these men who eyewitnessed the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, they all gave their lives as a testimony to what they saw, and not in nice ways. It's one thing to say you would die for a lie. It's another thing to take better than hundreds of people were witnesses to Jesus rising from the dead. How many of you know that? Hundreds. Not just a few, not just a handful, hundreds of them. And guys, they were tortured for their testimony, crucified, burned alive, torn apart by horses. And, two horses put together and they wrap their arms and they tear them apart. They did all these horrible things, and there is no record in all of ancient history of anyone ever recanting and saying, it's not true, let me go. No, they saw him. And when you see someone who was so brutally tortured that he was so disfigured, you can't even recognize him as hardly human. You see him dead. You see that he's put in the grave. You see that the tomb was sealed with a Roman seal, and a guard, the Navy SEALs of their day, were put out in front. But this morning, 2,000 years ago, the guard was gone. They went AWOL. Now, how many of you know that Romans don't go AWOL? Because if they do, they get burned alive. There's no, oh, bad boy, we're going to take away your pay for a month. No, they kill you for this. And there were no exceptions. You don't abandon your post, but they were gone. And that 2-ton stone was flung up on top of a mountain, and there was an angel sitting on it. I love how he sat on it. Show you what. I want to try to put my boss in there. They were gone. The body was gone. And then when he appeared to them, and when Thomas touched the hands and the side, when they knew it, when it was real, these guys went from scared to death and abandoning him and betraying their master to standing on street corners saying, we saw him, and they arrested them, and they beat them, and they just rejoiced. Thank you that you gave me the right to suffer the way he did. I mean, what kind of a mindset is that? That's somebody who saw a dead man raised to life. That's what it is. When you look at all of that evidence, you can go back and forth. Books have been written on it. The truth of the matter is, it can go in this ear and write out that one. And one of the key reasons for that is that most people today, they look at this and they go, that's great. That's interesting. Maybe I'll read that book. But how in the world is that relevant to me today? I've got my own problems. I've got issues with unemployment or underemployment. How does that help me? How does it help me when I'm dealing with addiction right now? How does it help me when I'm scared every day when I turn on the TV? All I see is terrorism everywhere. All I see is racism. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. And I look around me and I see all of these politicians, and you can't trust any one of them. I mean, I don't care what you think of Clinton, Cruz, Sanders, or Trump, and that was in alphabetical order. The truth of the matter is, I don't care what you think about any one of them. How many of you know we can't trust any of them? Okay, everybody thinks that. They just don't want to say it out loud because that would be a bad commercial. But we're all jaded, frustrated. And we hear a story about something that happened thousands of years ago, and we think to ourselves, how in the world can that relate to me? And you know what? I want to answer that question today because I think it's an honest question. I think it's a real question. I think we need to answer that. I think you need to be able to answer that to your friends, to those that challenge your faith. It reminds me of a story of a friend of mine. And I've met him, but I don't know him well, but my friend knows him very well. His name is Jim. And Jim has a hard story. I mean, he was one of those really rotten kids. I mean, when he was in the 5th grade, he started stealing stuff because his parents were a mess anyway. They were alcoholics and whatnot. So he just kind of followed in the family tradition of let me rip off everybody I can. Stole from his mom, stole from his dad, stole from everybody, got busted breaking into apartments and so on. I mean, and he graduated from that to being a true juvenile delinquent, always in fights and gangs, all kinds of problems. He let his own brother get arrested for something he did. And this kept going on and on and on. In fact, it went on for 25 years. And for 25 years, from the time the guy was 14 years old, his parents completely wrote him off. His family wouldn't have anything to do with him. He fell deep into drugs, and he became a dealer. But during all of that time, He was hanging around a certain church youth program that I know of in San Diego that had a profound effect on him in terms of telling him, this is the truth, this is the truth, this is the truth, this is the truth. It didn't change anything. He continued to do drugs, but he heard it. Jesus rose from the dead. You can trust this. The Bible is trustworthy. All of these things. But it just kind of went in this ear and out that one until one day he was behind in an alley doing a drug deal with another guy who pulled out a weapon. And Jim pulled out a weapon and there was a fight and he killed the man. And in his terror, he ran away and he realized, I've done drugs and theft and all this and now I've killed a man. Manslaughter. And in his fear, he finally fell on his face and said, God, I have heard. I know that it's the truth. And I'm desperate for your help. And he called upon the living God and gave his heart to Jesus Christ that day. But then he had a problem. I've killed a man. What do I do? He actually went down to the police department and turned himself in. They could not believe it. He turned himself in. They tried him, convicted him, and sent him to prison for a long time. But when he got there, he started a Bible study, and he got busy, and hundreds of inmates got saved because of Jim. And then when Jim finally got out of jail, he got married, he had children, he got involved in the ministry at my church where I come from. His story was well known. He literally touched thousands of people. He went from being a killer drug dealer to being a minister that has reached out and helped transform the lives of tens of thousands of people. Tens of thousands. That's a life that was revolutionized by Jesus today. Not 2,000 years ago, now. There's so many people that say, how in the world can this story relate to me? Just think about Jim's life. It had a revolutionary effect on Jim. It had an effect that can totally transform your life today. It can totally transform the lives of your friends today. It is relevant, and I need to show you how. Because the truth of the matter is there's so many people that want to discount this story because they think to themselves, how can a bunch of guys in sandals that are fishermen have any relationship to my world? I want to show you that it was exactly the same 2,000 years ago as it is today, except for one thing: technology. That's the only difference, is the technology. Everything else is the same. Let me explain what I'm talking about. I know that you guys are worried about politicians. You're worried you can't trust them. You feel like, how can they relate? Well, check out this guy. The first one, go back. Nero. Okay, you want to talk about an idiot? This is a first century ruler. You're worried about Clinton and Cruz and Sanders and Trump. How about Nero for your boss? He murdered his brother, his wife, and his mother because they had the audacity to actually disagree with one of his policies. I mean, you may or may not like the current person in the White House, but he's not doing what Nero did. Or how about King Herod? Herod, at that time in the first century, executed literally entire villages of people who dared to stand up and say, we don't like your policies. He just killed everybody in town. Everybody, right down to the child born yesterday. Everybody in town. That's what the first century was like. King Herod had his own wife murdered because she had the audacity to say that she didn't like his policies. So he killed her. He also killed his brother and his sons. Caesar said it would be better to be a pig in Herod's house than one of his own sons. That's the kind of world that the first century was like. And you're worried about a presidential election? You think they can't relate? How about terrorism? We hear about what happened in Brussels. We hear about all these things, and we're afraid. And we think, well, back 2,000 years ago, they couldn't relate. Wrong again. The terrorism back then would eclipse anything that you have seen today. Anything. Not even close. The Romans, they ruled by sheer terror. You did it their way or they killed everybody. It was just that simple. They would come into the city of surprise and they would say, there are some people here that have been saying some bad things against the emperor. We're going to take every single male in this town. We're going to strip them down naked, crucify them on crosses, and let their bodies sit up there and rot on the side of the road just to remind you, don't mess with us. That's how the Romans took care of things. Josephus tells us that at the siege of Galba, on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, the Romans, when they finally broke through the walls, killed 30,000 people in a single day. The blood ran so thick in the Jordan River that he says that the crystal clear waters of the Sea of Galilee turned red. That's terrorism. But it gets worse. There was a group of people in that day called the Sukari. The Sukari would wander around and they would have this short knife inside underneath their robes. And they would get into crowds and they would simply stab you in the back by the hundreds, even the thousands, if they even remotely suspected that you were on the other side in terms of politics. It got so bad, Josephus says, and I quote, this quote is 2,000 years old. He said, more terrible than the crimes themselves was the fear they arose, every man hourly expecting death as in war. That sounds like an op-ed piece that could have been written yesterday. So when people want to say to me, how can this story 2,000 years ago relate to today? It was exactly the same. The only difference is technology. The only difference is that we can be meaner faster. The only difference is that we can kill more faster, although the Romans have got us beat so far. So far. The truth is, when people get upset about racism and they think that Jesus could not relate or his people could not relate, did you forget they were Jewish? Did you forget that they were a minority? Did you forget that the Gentiles called the Jewish people dogs? Racism was very much alive and well in the first century. Jesus understood it because he lived it. And you're worried about employment, you're worried about being poor. Jesus didn't have 2 nickels to rub together or a place to live. He understood being poor. He understood being unemployed and underemployed because he walked it. He lived it. And he had been employed at one time because he was a construction worker like his dad, stepdad. Right? So he knew what it was like to have a good job, and now you don't. He knew all about it. He can relate. He understands every temptation you've been through. He understands lying politicians because he lived under Herod's rule. In fact, Herod tried to kill him when he was only 2 years old. Killed everybody in town. He understands lying politicians. He lived it. Jesus can relate to where you are today because he was a friend of addicts and prostitutes and sinners like you and your friends. Jesus can relate 100% in every way. But you know what? Jesus didn't just relate to a world that's every bit as messed up as yours. He offered a solution. He offered a solution. He offers the same solution today. And this is what you need to say. When you're talking to your friends and they say, well, you did this whole story about what happened thousands of years ago, it doesn't relate. You can say, oh, yes, it does. And you can go through it. Terrorism and politicians and unemployment and racism, it was all very much alive and very real just as well back then as it is today. But Jesus didn't just say have hope in God. He offered a solution that has worked then and a solution that works now, a solution that worked for Jim and a solution that can work for you. And that solution was himself. He offered himself. He said, you make me the Lord and King of your life, and I will turn it all around, because the problem today and the problem back then is the same. Corrupt human hearts. That's what it is. See, so many people think that we're so much more civilized than we were back then. How many of you know that's that's such a big lie? It's a pile of manure so high we could put the Empire State Building beside it. You know why I know that? Because if technology and our modern way of thinking is so much better, why do we have nuclear weapons? Why do we have poison gas and biological weapons? We haven't solved anything other than our ability to kill more and faster. That's the only thing we've really solved. So technology and modern thinking is not the solution. Jesus said very clearly that he was the solution. What does he mean? You see, the human heart is corrupt. The human heart wants what it wants when it wants it. The human heart is 100% totally and every other way self-absorbed. There is no program that's going to beat that. There is no philosophy that's going to beat that. There's no religion that's going to beat that. Because all of those things are external. You're trying to get on the outside and put yourself in a little box that's going to fix your problem. But that's not going to solve the problem of the human heart. Romans chapter 3, verse 23 says that you have all done wrong, we have all sinned, we all fall short of God's standard of what is good. Why? Because our hearts have been corrupted from birth. No one ever had to teach you how to lie. No one ever had to teach you how to steal. No one ever had to teach you how to be not self-centered. Nobody had to teach you how to hit somebody over the head with a toy car, as Emerson did this morning. And had to be corrected by his mommy, who said, go say you're sorry. Why do we have to teach kids to do that? Why aren't they so nice and sweet and wonderful from birth? Because they're human like you. That's why. We have all sinned. We've all fallen short of his glorious standard. But Jesus didn't just die on the cross and rise again from the grave. He says, I am alive forevermore. I sit at the right hand of the Father. And if you put your faith in me, I will put my spirit in you. And when I put my spirit in you, it will begin to transform your heart. And that is the only solution to all of the problems: terrorism, racism, self-centeredness, greed, all of those things. The only solution is the transformation of the human heart. And only his spirit can do it. It's very much the same today as it was back then. People need a Savior today just like they did 2,000 years ago. People need a Savior today when they're facing the fear of terrorism just like they did back then. They were afraid of terrorism then. You're afraid of it now. Jesus said, I'll offer the same solution then. I'll offer the same solution now. Turn your heart over to me. I will transform your heart. That's the only thing that's going to stop terrorism. How many of you know that the majority of people today do not get this? They think that the terrorism problem that we're having today can be solved by economics. How many of you know that? They think that if you just give these people enough opportunity, just give these people enough opportunity, and then they won't want to kill us anymore. If you don't oppose them, if you don't say anything that might offend them, then they won't kill you anymore. How many of you know that totally and completely misses it? You have a group of people whose hearts are set on one thing: the domination of the entire planet to their way of thinking. They believe with all of their heart. They believe with all of their heart that if they kill the enemies of their God, then they go straight to heaven. They live in mortal, absolute terror that their sins will consign them to hell. And the only way to be absolutely guaranteed that they won't go to hell is if they kill the enemies of their God. Now, how are you going to stop that with economics? Do you think they really care? The truth of the matter is, there were 12 terrorists that attacked the day that the towers fell. Did you know that 8 of them were millionaires? So it has nothing to do with economics. Nothing. It has nothing to do with opportunity. They came from one of the richest countries in the world, Saudi Arabia. No, it has to do with a corrupt human heart. And until we face that truth, then we're going to start walking in Romans 6:23 all the time, which says that the reward on earth for having offended God is death. We all deserve to be separated from God, and that separation after death is called hell. That's what Romans is telling us. He's saying, look, this corrupt heart will only lead to decay and destruction of everything around you. You can't fix it with a program. You can't fix it with a philosophy. You can't fix it with economics. You can't fix it with politics. You can only fix it by the transformation of the heart. And you simply can't do that by yourself. You simply cannot do that simply by deciding, I'm going to be good now. I'm going to do nice things now. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't change your heart. You need a power from outside yourself to invade you. You need a power that will transform you, and Jesus is the one who offers that power. You see, the truth of the matter is, the wages of sin, as it says here, is death. So Jesus said, God had to transform us. And the only way to do that was for him to literally cause a clash within the cosmic law of sin and death. See, the law of God is the soul that sins, it shall die. It shall be in death at all times. It will be separated from God. If you have done or said or even thought anything that offends him, you are separated from him. So what Jesus did is he took on humanity. God took on humanity and lived the perfect, sinless life. Jesus voluntarily went to that cross. When you read the eyewitness testimonies, he flat out looked Pilate in the eye and said, snap my fingers and I could end this. I'm only here because I allow you to do this. Remember that part? Jesus was in total control. He allowed this to happen. And when he died on the cross, he did it as a proxy for you and me. And when Jesus died, remember, the soul that sins, it shall die, but Jesus never sinned. So it literally caused death to work backwards. And Jesus rose from the grave. He conquered death. He owns death. And now he says, I am alive forevermore. And if you will turn your life over to me 100% lock, stock, and barrel, if you give me all of you, I will pour my living spirit into you and I will transform your heart. And I will raise you up on the last day. He offered it then, and he offers it now. But all of the arguments, all of the evidence, I could spend the next 3 hours, believe me I could, going through all of the evidence to show you that it's beyond a reasonable doubt that Jesus rose from the dead. It's beyond a reasonable doubt that the God that we describe in the book of Genesis is the creator of the heavens and the earth. We could spend hours going through that evidence, and I have. I've written books on it. And the truth of the matter is, for so many people, have just kind of go in this ear and out that one. Why is that? Well, Jesus said, here's why. There's a warning that Jesus gave. You can find it in the book of Mark, chapter 4, verse 3. He said this. He said, listen, pay attention because this is important. And guys, I want you to know this is just as important for those of you that believe every word I just said. There may be somebody in this room that's listening to me going, I have yet to give my heart to Jesus. I'm listening. The majority of you are already Christians. I look around, I see your faces, I know you. I've seen the fruit in your life. I know you're a believer. Don't let this go in one ear and out the other. Pay attention. That's what Jesus is saying. Listen. There was a farmer. He went out to plant some seeds, and as he scattered it across the field, some seed fell on a footpath, and the birds came and they ate it. And other seed fell on shallow soil with underlying rock, and the plant sprang up quickly, but it soon wilted beneath the hot sun, and it died because the roots had no nourishment in the shallow soil. And other seed fell among thorns, and it shot up and it choked out the tender blades so that it produced no grain. And still other seed fell on fertile soil and produced a crop that was 30, 60, or even 100 times as much as was planted. And then he said, anyone who is willing to hear should listen and understand what I'm saying. Now let's think about it for a second. How many of you know that most of us, when we look at this story, we think about the different types of ground? Because that's what it's talking about, right? Hard ground, shallow ground, rocky ground, thorny. Nobody ever stopped to think about the farmer. So let's think about that for a second. How many of you know that farmers do not intentionally throw their seed on any of those kinds of grounds except for the good one? Are you paying attention? See, we forget that part. The farmer didn't intentionally throw it on hard ground. He didn't intentionally throw it on rocky ground. No, he intentionally threw it on the good ground. If it falls on the other ground, that's more or less an accident, right? Why is that so important? Because if we do not consider the kind of ground that we have in our own hearts, then we're going to miss the fact that Jesus is saying, I'm the farmer, and I'm throwing it on the good ground. If you've got bad ground, I got nothing to do with you. You're not my intent. So you need to examine where your heart is, because the master who's throwing out the seed, he's aiming for the good ground. I think we work too hard on people who have a hard heart or a thorny heart or stones in their heart. I really do. You need to examine your own heart and make it ready to receive what God has for you. That's important. I think that's really important. But let's take a look at this for a second. What are these types of ground? See, the message that Jesus can transform your life, the message that Jesus can forgive you, that's the seed. That's what Jesus explains in this chapter. He says that's the seed, that's the message of God. And the condition of the soil, I'm not aiming for you if you don't have good soil. So take a look at it. That's what he's saying. So the soil is really your attitude, and your attitude is a choice. You see, if you just decide you don't care, you just will not be impressed. I could throw out all the evidence in the world. It could be so obvious that only a fool would reject it. But if you don't care because you have the I don't care attitude, you simply will not be impressed. That's hard ground, really hard ground. And only you can change it. Only you can change it. Only you can decide to care. If you won't really think about it, you won't really go deep with it, you don't want to take Jesus seriously because you know, or at least you suspect, that's going to require some serious change in your life, and you don't want to go there. How many of you know that people hate change? They're scared to death of it. And because change might be scary, it might require some real soul searching in your heart. You don't want to think about it, so you let it just kind of sit there on top of the soil like that. You just kind of let it sit there in your mind. And you're going to walk out of this room in about 15 minutes from now, and you're just going to go, shove it out of my head. It's going to get snatched out of your head, like birds coming in and just eating it up. But there are some of you who really get this stuff. You understand what I'm saying. You believe it, and it affects you emotionally. But Jesus is warning you. He's saying, don't be shallow. Be careful. Because there are some people, and I've seen them many, many times, they'll come into a service like this, they get all excited, they get all emotional, they'll have lots of tears, but they won't go deep. They won't get down there underneath it. They won't go deep. See, the truth is, a healthy plant sinks its roots down deep in order to get the water down there and pull the nutrients up. But most of us don't want to go deep in our lives. We don't want to get down there deep. You know why? because there's stones down in there and we know it. Most of us have stones in our life. What are stones? Stones are those hard areas that you simply will not submit to Jesus. You just won't go there. You like this little thing that you got in your life. You know it's ungodly. You know it doesn't bring him glory at all. You know it's holding you back, but you're going to hold on to it. And you don't want to go down deep and see those things because nobody likes to look in the mirror and go, that's got to change. We don't like that. So we stay shallow up on the surface. We get a big smile on our face and Jesus loves you and God has a great plan for your life. Isn't that wonderful? But as soon as things get rough, you're gone. Because that's like a plant that its roots are exposed. The water, when it hits the ground, it's just going to evaporate and disappear. And there's no nutrients. You don't grow. You just kind of stagnate right there. There's a lot of Christians that do this. They become Christians. They had an emotional experience. They get all fired up, but they're not willing to go down there deep and really change something, really confront it, and really take that area and say, I'm going to turn this over to the Lord. I'm going to learn what the Bible says about this, and I'm going to defeat that. I'm going to walk, in the Spirit in this area. They don't want to go there. There's rocks. Could be an addiction. Could be a habit. Could be an attitude. And you have all kinds of excuses. That's just the way I am. It's all I've ever known. Whatever your excuse happens to be, it's just a rock. But there's another kind of heart, and this one's very, very common among Christians today. In fact, I would say this is the most common one. I know a Christian brother, good guy, but he has gotten so wrapped up in making money, so wrapped up in advancing his career, so wrapped up in taking the next step on the path towards paying off the home and having a great retirement. He is so wrapped up in those things that on average he'll go to church once a month. When I knew him before, he was here all the time. This is a crowded heart. This is a heart full of thorns. It gets so wrapped up in stuffitis, so wrapped up in distractions that you're not in the Word. You're not growing. You're not serving. And when you get there, when you get it crowded out, it says it chokes it out. So the message of God comes to you, whether it be the Easter story itself and you need to give your heart to Jesus, or it happens to be something that pricks your heart and says, this area's got to change. This is what I got to turn over to the Lord, right? You hear it, but it's so thorny, so much distraction that it chokes it out and it produces no fruit. You don't grow. The truth of the matter is, I thought this was an interesting statistic, that that for every 60 pounds of wheat, it takes 60 pounds of wheat to plant 1 acre. 1 acre of good soil. 1 acre takes 60 pounds. But in that same acre, there are already 3,000 pounds of weed seeds already in the dirt. Let me say that again. If you take and you want to plant 1 acre worth of grain, it takes 60 pounds of wheat. But there's already 3,000 pounds of weed seeds in that dirt. That's what's happening to most Christians today. They're so distracted by so many things. Guys, if you have to cut things out of your life in order to be more available for doing what God is calling you to do, then that's what you need to do. You need to pull out your weeds. But what kind of a heart do you have? If you hear a message like this, and I'm going to give you a few minutes here to respond. If you know that you're that person, if you know you're the person that is so distracted by so many things, you know in your heart that God has called you to do X, Y, or Z, or to change it, but you haven't gotten around to it because you're too distracted, then it's time to pull out your weeds. If you know there's an area in your life that you are holding out from the living God and you know it, today's the day to pull the rocks out of your ground. Because God is looking for good ground. Look at the last one. Jesus said this, but these are the ones that are sown on good ground. Those who hear the word, they accept the word, and they bear fruit. Some 30, some 60, and some 100. That's what God is aiming for. And God is saying, you need to examine your life and go, what attitude do I have? Are there rocks I need to pull out? Are there roots, or are there weeds that I need to pull out today? Don't leave this place the same as you came in. That's why Jesus warned that the message of Him being able to transform your life is a message that can hit the wrong kind of ground and do nothing. But it's not the message that's the problem. It's your heart. So the question is, how will you apply what you've learned today? How are you going to apply this?